Welcome back. If you've been just joining us, we've been talking about media bias among the media themselves.
That's right, the situation at NBC, which sheds some light on how they have overlooked their own misdeeds when it was convenient for them.
So the interesting thing is, we were talking about this last block about this New York Times editorial that says, hey, Biden's got to be investigated, right? And it was interesting because it's not just conservatives that are saying this is silly. This is a quote, this is a tweet that Jonathan Swan, he's one of the senior reporters at Axios, he put this tweet out, and it literally says, I mean, I love this thing. I've seen some spectacularly stupid stuff from the New York Times editorial board, but this might take the cake. It does take the cake, and he wasn't alone. I mean, there was a bunch of others. I thought that was probably the most appropriate. But the idea that the New York Times is saying that the DNC, which, regardless of what party you're part of, the idea that a political party is capable of conducting an investigation of anything is, on its face, ridiculous.
Yeah, well, just like Heidi said, they're not an investigative outlet. That's not their purpose. And we saw Kavanaugh, he was investigated by the FBI. That makes sense. But for the DNC, no one is going, if they did an investigation, do you think that anyone's actually going to believe it? They're going to say, no, it's
think about this, like a national party has, you know, an HR department, a finance department, a political department, a comms department. Who is qualified? This is laughable on its face. And the idea that they suggested it just shows you how much they really don't want to get to the bottom of this.
Yeah, well, they're afraid of what they might find, I think. But, you know, Sean, I think that begs the question, and no one, I don't think, has answered it, but who should do this investigation? I mean, who would you suggest?
Yeah, there's not a great answer. I think the first thing is this treasure trove of Senate papers at the University of Delaware. And I think that you could easily appoint some kind of academic panel that says we need to go through and anything that comes up with Tara Reid gets put out. I think the bigger question is the allegations themselves, and Biden should subject himself to an FBI investigation. That's the only way that he could reassure people in a nonpartisan way that it was fully investigated.
Yeah, I do think it might have to be that measure.
You know, I want to go back for 1 second to this Andy Lack thing that we were talking about with the media panel. What's really interesting to me about this is that in Lack's statement, the one thing that he always talks about, this higher than mighty First Amendment, he says, you know, they shouldn't be almost have their integrity questioned as journalists. Well, number one, Heidi brought this up, that they invite that in the Society of Professional Journalism standards. It says that they should invite criticism. And secondly, the same First Amendment that gives the press the freedom to write what they want also gives each one of us as Americans the freedom to say what we want. So while they can write it, we can comment on it. And the idea that he's basically trying to say that you shouldn't allow, you know, they should be able to write and print and broadcast what they want without anybody critiquing it is ridiculous.
Yeah, that is ridiculous. And I do feel like we're in an era now where a lot of outlets or journalists get upset when people are criticizing, say, how dare you? Right. But that's part of being a journalist, that your work can be criticized, especially if it's an opinion piece.
And look, we talked about this, but this is him criticizing everybody else for what they're doing.
Yes.
But when it came to him, when he was criticized for how he handled the Weinstein matter and whether or not NBC swept it under the rug and how they handled the Matt Lauer situation, Ronan Farrow lays it all out there. It clearly, as Joe Concha pointed out, won a Pulitzer Prize. The New Yorker printed it without a problem. And there's a question as to whether or not Andy Lack and his subordinates were covering up. And he says Ronan Farrow was wrong. So he can criticize a reporter and say that they're off base when the attack is against him. But when anybody else is getting attacked, how dare you question the integrity of a reporter?
Yeah, that's right. Do you think that this is great that NBC is kind of cleaning house by getting rid of Lack, or is this kind of, you know, just them saying, hey, we're going to start changing matters, but...
You know, I don't know. That's a great question, because I think that this is part of a wholesale change, and it's their way of saying, oh, we've dealt with it. But I think that it's part of a broader culture, which is that when the media wants to attack somebody, they can't be questioned. When they get attacked for their actions, that's supposedly out of bounds. And so this is, I think, their way of sweeping this under the rug and saying, we addressed it, so don't look over here anymore. But it's a bigger, broader problem, not just at NBC, but at every newsroom, where they don't want anyone to criticize their work.
Yeah. Well, it was 3 years after all this stuff had happened, too, so it's past the point of due.
Right, that's right.
All right. Well, a lot of people are asking, when can I get out in the public, or am I willing to get out in the public? When we come back, our company is going to join us to discuss their thoughts when we return.